Okay, we should be live, commissioners.
Okay. We'll let Heather get to her seat. Welcome to planning and zoning meeting on this second day of summer, June 22nd. Oh,
Let's just make sure we're actually on YouTube.
we want to be on YouTube.
Got it. Thanks. That's just the Zoom recording. I'll just double check on YouTube that it's actually broadcasting. You open that up?
We're up.
Okay, we're good to go.
Okay, welcome again to our planning and zoning meeting. We will begin by Gavin will lead us in the pledge and I'll say a prayer.
After me. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic from which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Our Heavenly Father, we are grateful for the opportunity we have to meet together tonight. We are thankful for this beautiful community in which we live, for the good people that help make this a good place to be. We are thankful for the opportunity we have to live in a free land and to have this meeting here. We are grateful for the water that we've received this past year and thankful for that help to us. We pray now for Thy Spirit to be with us this night. Please help us to be able to discuss things in a good way, that we can be civil and kind and work through issues in a pleasing manner, in a way that will help the citizens of our town. We thank Thee again for the many blessings that we have and say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Okay, we need a motion to adopt the agenda.
I so move.
And a-
Second.
Okay, Heron moved that we, and Kenny seconded to adopt the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Right, let's move on. We need, hopefully you all got to read the minutes from May 4th. And we need a motion to adopt the minutes. Or are there any questions before we do that? Any concerns? No.
I move we approve the minutes of the planning meeting for June 4th,
May 4th.
May 4th. Thank you.
Heron moved that we pass the minutes. We need a second. That
A
we
second.
approve. Heather seconded it. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes of May 4th. We propose they be accepted. All right, let's move on. Scott, do you want to give us a follow-up on issues from the previous meeting?
I don't have any issues from the previous meeting to follow up on, so no
Oh.
worries there.
All right, moving right along on item number 1, we are having a public hearing for potential recommendation regarding the city initiative zoning text amendment to the North Logan Municipal Code. Proposed amendments suggest multiple sections of the code related to permissibility and standards for short-term rentals, accessory dwelling units, and conditional use permits. Is that enough said?
Yeah, and some noticing requirements as well.
All right, Scott, why don't you start us out?
Okay, so I'm gonna open up the staff report here real quick. Okay, I'll flip through this as needed as questions arise, but I'll give kind of an overview for the members of the public who are here who may not have been present during our work sessions on this particular project. So everybody understands this particular decision is a recommendation from the Planning Commission on the text that is proposed to the City Council. The Planning Commission acts as a recommending body, and the City Council acts as the legislative body that would potentially adopt or modify before adoption, or choose not to act on this if they should so choose. But that would follow a recommendation from the Planning Commission, which is part of the reason why we're here tonight. But before the Planning Commission makes a recommendation, we hold a public hearing for members of the public to opine on the text, to make their thoughts known on the record. So going through this real quick, what this proposal does is a couple of things. It looks at detached and internal or attached accessory dwelling units. It looks at short-term rentals. It looks at conditional use permits, and it looks at noticing requirements. Real quick, we'll just scratch the noticing requirements off of this real quick because it's a state mandated requirement that we provide notices. It always has been, but the legislature has made some changes to how municipalities and counties and land use authorities notice the items on the agenda and the actions that they take as bodies. And what they did this last legislative session was standardize the noticing across the entire state. So previously, municipalities could decide how they wanted to issue notices. There were some guidelines from the state where they could adopt additional noticing that they individually in municipalities might think is appropriate. But what the legislature did is they standardized it. They created a Class A and a Class B notice, depending on the type of decision being made by a municipality. So this particular text amendment goes in and it basically strikes all of our noticing requirements out of local code. And it just references state code saying we'll follow the state requirements and we're just going to clean that up. So we pulled that language out. You'll see that in the red lines here that we are not going to follow our own noticing requirements. We'll just follow the state noticing requirements to bring ourselves into compliance with that recent legislation. Okay, so that's what that is. We'll just kind of knock that off real quick. So let's jump in here real quick to give an overview. In a nutshell, I'm going to try to distill this down as simply as possible so the members of the public can understand. There's a lot of red lines, but what it does is it changes how we look at short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. Okay. Our current code requires that a detached accessory dwelling unit obtain a conditional use permit before it can be permitted. And that's for a detached accessory dwelling unit. Those are like mother-in-law apartments or accessory apartments that you might have on your property. Okay. However, our code right now allows for internal or attached accessory dwelling units by right. It's just a permitted use. So if you want to convert your basement into an apartment, if you want to frame out some attic space in your detached garage, you would need to come to the Planning Commission for the detached, but you wouldn't have to come to the Planning Commission for an attached. So there's a difference in how we treat accessory dwelling units, whether they're attached or detached right now. Okay. As far as short-term rental is concerned, our code currently allows for short-term rentals as a permitted use. So anybody who wants to operate a short-term rental is currently only required to obtain a business license. There's no review by the Planning Commission or City Council. Okay. That's how things sit today. Now, we've had a couple of things occur over the past year with regards to short-term rentals. We've had a couple of code enforcement issues, some complaints from neighbors, and we've also had a couple issues with how we treat accessory dwelling units. And so based on what we've witnessed this last year, we've identified some items in our code that could be improved to, I think, better the situation. So what we're looking at here is swapping how we look at short-term rentals and accessory dwelling units. Short-term rentals right now, they're a permitted use. And I think that there's a lot of concern amongst the public that there's no oversight on those. And so the proposal simply changes them from simply permitted to conditionally permitted. It's still a property right that we're allowing in all the residential zoning classifications in the city. So we're not taking away the right to short-term rent. But what we are doing is we are requiring anybody who wants to begin a short-term rental to come to the Planning Commission, show what they would like to do with their property, and allow the Planning Commission to review that prior to issuing a conditional use permit. Okay, so that's one change. The second change that we're proposing here is changing the detached accessory dwelling unit from a conditional use permit requirement to being permitted, where If you want to build an accessory dwelling unit in your backyard, the answer is yes. It has always been yes, but instead of a conditional use permit, you simply get a building permit. And we review what you're planning to build based on the standards in the code. Does it meet the standards? Yes or no? Does the square footage meet? Are the setbacks adequate? Are the height requirements satisfied? Does it integrate architecturally and materially with the home? If you can answer all those questions and meet the standards, you'll be issued a building permit under this proposal, instead of having to come for a public hearing with the planning commission and a conditional use permit, which is the current. Hang on. So we'll get to a public hearing section of this in a bit, so we'll get there. But in a nutshell, that's what this does. It cleans up a few things as well, and we can get into that as needed. But do the planning commission have any questions about the nuts and bolts?
I have one quick clarification. So the issuance of, if we move short-term rentals to a conditional use permit, the issuance of the conditional use permit is an administrative action, right?
It is still administrative, that's
Okay.
right. Yep, there's no public hearing associated with administrative actions, and this text amendment clarifies that as well. So there would not be notices out to the public, there would be no public hearing, because if they meet the standards, they have to be approved under state code, not local code.
But they come before the commission.
That's right, and there can be conditions imposed. So as we look at their property and how they would like to short-term rent, there may be a requirement that they put up a fence. There may be a requirement that they provide adequate parking. There may be a requirement for a few of those things to mitigate reasonably anticipated impacts. Now, a conditional use permit is not meant to completely eliminate some of these issues that may be anticipated, but simply mitigate. And that's a state requirement that we cannot deny a conditional use permit if there's reasonable conditions that can be imposed.
And those conditions would have to be clarified in the code.
So there are standards in the code, but then the planning commission has some discretion to say, this is a reasonably anticipated impact to the community. And we can impose a condition to mitigate that impact, whatever that impact may be. So there is some discretion.
And that's the big change from a permit to a conditional use permit.
That's right. Yeah, but I want to make it clear, we're not taking away the property right. It's not something we're saying we're no longer allowing short-term rental. It's just changing the way that we permit them going forward.
So short-term rentals is for how long?
So the
Generally.
definition of short-term rental is a lease of 30 days or less.
Okay.
Anything over 30 days would be long-term lease.
Mhm.
And just since it sounds like this question will come up, anyone currently permitted on or for short-term rentals will be grandfathered into that current permit, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
And since it's a conditional use permit, they reapply every 12 months.
No.
Okay.
So the conditional use permit, once it's issued, as long as they continue to operate under the original conditions of that permit, it's in perpetuity.
Okay.
Now, one change that's in the code is it does clarify if you want to sell your property, the conditional use permit no longer extinguishes with the transfer of title. It does extinguish if the subsequent owner does not continue to operate that short-term rental or whatever the conditional use permit is issued for. So it needs to continue under the original terms, or they could amend it. They could come back and amend that permit. But if it is abandoned, then they would have to reapply.
Right.
So as I read through this, it's short-term, the proposed language says that short-term rentals aren't allowed in accessory dwelling units, either attached or detached,
Correct. Short-term.
the short term. And
Uh-huh.
so the only legal way to operate a short term is to short-term rent the entire premises.
Or a portion if you want to own or occupy. So short-term rental could just be a room in the home or the basement. But it couldn't be part of a formally recognized accessory dwelling unit based on this code if it were to be adopted. So if we grant an accessory dwelling unit a permit, it can be long-term rented. And so long-term lease, 30 days or more, which goes with the original intent of why accessory dwelling units were established in the first place, was to open up additional housing options at more attainable pricing. And so what we're trying to do is just clarify, if you'd like to have a detached accessory dwelling unit or an internal dwelling unit, you can lease that to an unrelated party or an unrelated family on a long-term basis, but not on a short-term basis.
So if a property owner were to get a business license, because it's permitted in the proposal, how do they, if they wanted to then change their mind and run a short term, how do they extinguish it? They just let the business license lapse, or?
Yeah, well, so are you saying if they were to get a permitted accessory dwelling unit and then decide they didn't want to?
Yeah, and they ran it for a year, and they maybe they didn't find they had good leasing on a long-term basis, and they changed their mind to when they wanted to short-term rentals. What would be the process they'd have to go through to convert to allow short-term rental?
That's a good question. Because for example, let's say you build a cabin in the backyard as a detached accessory dwelling unit and you long-term lease it for a few years, and then you decide you don't want to do that, but you want to maybe short-term rent a portion of the home. There's not a mechanism in the code right now that prohibits you from making that switch, but it would be clear that you can't just put your short-term guests in that detached accessory dwelling unit as a standalone dwelling to be rented on a short-term basis. So if that's a concern, we could certainly add some language into the proposal to clarify that if you feel like that's needed, which that might be a good idea.
So if I want to do short-term rentals, my short-term renters need to be in the same structure as I'm in.
Not necessarily. That's not clarified. That's a good point.
So if I built a building that met code, but I didn't, I'm just wondering, how can you build one without it being a detached accessory dwelling unit?
So if you wanted to build just a garage in the backyard and maybe have some bonus living space in it.
Right.
So that would be allowed because any residential lot in our community is allowed to have accessory buildings,
Correct.
right? And if you have some bonus living space, maybe you have a pool house with like a hangout place, some pool table, tennis, whatever. You could do that, but you simply can't rent it to an unrelated family without having it formally recognized as an accessory dwelling unit. So you could use it for your single family residential use.
Mhm.
And maybe when, the extended family comes over, you can use it just for more elbow room. But you simply can't rent it to an unrelated family unless it meets the standards for a detached accessory dwelling unit.
So if I didn't formally go through the process to make it an approved accessory dwelling unit, it's feasible that I could start with short-term renting and put short-term renters in it because it's part of the living space, at least according to the language of the proposal.
Yeah. That could be looked at that way.
Okay. Thanks.
So I think Gavin brought up an interesting point. If you want to switch in the middle, we don't have any language there and so maybe that's something we need to add to make clear. If you have an accessory dwelling and it's not working and you want to turn it into a short-term rental, what do you have to do that?
And it's really two conditions. It's a switch to short-term or never establishing an accessory dwelling unit in the first place and then short-term.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's where it gets a little ambiguous because for all intents and purposes, it is a detached ADU. But I guess if you never went through the process of getting the permit for that, although we're talking about making that just an accepted use in these zones where you wouldn't have to get a conditional use permit.
That's
Right.
true.
You can get a permit to build an accessory dwelling. You have to get a conditional use permit to have a short-term rental. So if you have an accessory dwelling, all of a sudden you want to turn it into a short-term rental, that's the confusion here, right?
No, that's a good observation because you're
Yeah.
changing the use at that point. So if you are granted a detached accessory dwelling unit and it's built in the backyard and you're able to rent that long term, but then you decide to change that, you'd have to come through and get a conditional use permit at that change of use. So that does somewhat address that concern. But it doesn't necessarily address the concern of having the affordable housing component try to protect that. That's a good observation. So there's some protection going from a permitted use to a conditionally permitted use, but it doesn't long-term ensure that a detached dwelling is used for long-term rental purposes if it's going to be rented.
Because if an applicant came for a conditional use permit for a short-term rental, and there was nothing in the code that that described how the city sees or wants to put together, how they want to manage short-term rentals, if there was never a permitted accessory dwelling unit, there's nothing that says they couldn't put short-term renters in an outbuilding.
Yeah, no, there's nothing
So-
that says that.
So I think we can go through this more and listen to people's input and on it, but we may want to talk about language for that before we
No, it's a good observation.
make a proposal.
Make it clear.
I guess
very
just
clear.
Just to
think-
make sure, in that use case where someone has a detached ADU in which they had long-term renters. And they wanted to transition and they came to apply for conditional use permit to transition to short-term rentals. Wouldn't that be denied under the code right now because short-term rentals are not permitted in a detached ADU?
That's what led to my question.
It's kind of like a dog
Okay.
chasing its
So,
tail a little bit. huh?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, and I think that the intent of the planning commission based on past discussion and work session is that they would like to protect that affordable housing intent, if I'm not mistaken. And the other side of the argument is folks would like to utilize their asset and leverage their asset to maybe float some harder months with some supplemental income. You know, that might be affordable housing back on the owner, allowing them to afford the home and the mortgage that they're in by short-term renting a portion of their property. So that's the other side of the argument, both sides of the fence, right? I think that staff's ultimate recommendation is we keep accessory dwelling units for the intended purpose of affordable housing, but that's maybe harder said than done in some instances. But anyways, that is the crux of the text amendment. There's a lot of red lines that allow that to happen. And I'm happy to go through the details if anybody has questions about that, but also happy to answer any questions that may arise in the public hearing.
Ready? Should we open up any more questions here before we open up our public hearing? No. All right. We're opening up a public hearing on the potential recommendation of regarding a city initiative zoning text amendment to North Logan Municipal Code regarding detached and attached dwellings and short-term rentals. Okay, before you begin, please state your name for the record. Please speak into the microphone so that your comments can be recorded. Please limit your statements to 2 minutes. If you are also speaking on behalf of others, you may ask the chairman for more time. Please phrase your opinions in the form of statements, not questions. A public hearing is your opportunity to express your opinions to the Planning Commission. It is not a time to ask questions and expect dialogue between yourselves and the commission or city staff. Please address your comments to the commission, not to the public. The commission might ask questions about your comments in order for them to better understand you. If you have questions or need to discuss an issue, please meet with the Planning Commission members or the appropriate city staff member before the public hearing where dialogue can take place. You may provide a written statement as your input for a hearing. You may read your entire statement or summarize it. The 2-minute limit applies. You may provide a copy of a written statement to the city recorder. He will make copies for the commission. Written comments, if a copy is provided, become a part of the public record, but are not included in the minutes of the meeting. All right, so
Do you want me to be
anybody?
your timer?
Yes, we'll do that.
Yep.
2 minutes.
Got it.
So do we have any comments? Come up to the microphone, please.
One question. I didn't hear in that whole presentation why it is that the perception is that long-term rentals are more productive and more important to the community than short-term.
Okay,
Could we have you go up to the microphone
Just
so we
come
can
up
make sure
there
it's
and-
on the record? And make
Make it
sure
a
to,
statement.
make sure to provide your name for the record as well,
Yeah,
please.
I'll do that. My name is Bill Talbert. I've lived in the community here for 5 years. I am an architect, engineer, master planner by profession, retired. Served 14 years on an association board and nine years as president. So I've dealt with a lot of these unintended consequences and setting criteria to try to find the balance that the gentleman talked about earlier. I have concerns with what I've heard so far because there's a lot of undefined what's conditional mean. You can or can't have a dog. You can't have more than 2 dogs. I mean, there's so much big range of what conditions might be imposed for a conditional permit that until you know those details and have those pinned down to some extent, you don't know if those are arbitrary or whether they're justified. Having been on that board in a community for 14 years, I know that parking is always an issue, excess parking, excess occupancy. The nature of enforcing light pollution, sound pollution, and all those kinds of things are things you have to balance and have to adjust to reach a balance for the full-time community versus the part-time community. I understand the law that was passed by the state, what, 3 years ago, something like that, about additional dwelling units and having to go through a process to create those. But I'm concerned that there are a lot of people, some of which I recognize in the room, who made a significant personal financial investment because they had a permitted building or in a permitted additional dwelling unit, and changing the rules, changing their ability to choose how they want to do revenues. It may be that I want to go to Phoenix with my son in the wintertime, and short-term rentals up here would be a good way to provide me income as compared to a long-term rental. So there's a lot of that weighing that needs to be done, and I think that more detail is required.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Hello, my name is Nate Whitaker, resident of North Logan City. I'm a real estate investor, developer, but more importantly, a property rights advocate. And this feels like there's an overreach by the city to threaten property rights, property owners, and what they can and can't do, which threatening our freedom, that's pretty significant to do. I think this is a very slippery slope with lots of unintended consequences. I can appreciate you trying to address some neighbors' concerns, but there's a better way to do that. Island Park, if you're familiar with that community, they have lots of developments there where it's part of the HOA that you can or can't do a short-term rental, and other communities can. And so it's driven by the market. So perhaps I would consider, when a developer comes and presents a development to you, you can specify, do you intend to allow short-term rentals or not? And then people who wish to live in neighborhoods that have short-term rentals or not can choose to do so. But I'm concerned that this is a gross overreach on the city's part to take away property owners' freedoms. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Mr. Whitaker.
I'm Dave Flandreau. I've been a North Logan resident for a number of years. One of the things I did not hear state is whether or not these changes are going to be imposed with all the different classifications of codes that we have within the state ordinances. And I want to make sure that if there's been a use for a building that is could be modified for an existing building that could be modified for long-term or short-term rental, that because that building continues to exist, that it gets grandfathered as well into the previous or the original intention of the particular zone or classification of the ordinance. As you know, there's many different classifications there. And we have a specific interest in making sure that what buildings use that we use is going to best serve the community, but certainly don't feel that it's appropriate for limitations been placed on it that is outside of what its use has been. And so I have some concerns with that. And I also echo Nate Whitaker's comments as well. I just think that there's too many open-ended issues that we could be going down. And one of the questions that I have that I'd like to pose rhetorically perhaps is what those issues are that are creating this dialogue that has caused the community to have to take these kinds of actions. So anyway, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you.
Thank you.
Man,
Yes.
can I ask one question, just a clarifying of? You said I could,
we're
done with
the public hearing.
no, particularly of this member public.
Okay, go ahead.
You use the word classification.
Yes.
Do you mean zoning or like different types of
Yes.
zoning?
Yeah, I'm not sure the technical terms that you guys use.
Yeah, I just wanted to
all
make
right?
sure I understood. yeah.
So you have commercial, you've got industrial, you have residential. The one I have is residential business. And there's only 2 properties in North Logan that have that.
Okay,
And so
Thank
therefore
you.
I have some interest in that.
thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Eli Hopkins. First, I ask you to recognize that the loudest opinions are often not the majority. Many residents are ambivalent, but if pressed, most want government restrictions lessened, not increased. Second, it's notable that those who spoke to you in February about their short-term fears have yet to come to us personally. Rather, some continue to creepily watch, photograph, and scrutinize us and start rumors. Somehow, currently, we're communists and we have 40 people living in our house. Personally, I prefer the mafia or would be a escaped convict, but there are other great neighbors who we've grown to love, and they also are defenders of property rights. Third, some fears include parking. We already asked guests to park in our driveway and not in the street, even though it is currently legal. Pedophiles, this is completely irrational. However, we've had our guests, unsafe drivers. We should worry about teenage drivers first, and there's supporting data for that. Most fears are purely emotional with zero facts. Finally, what we've experienced so far is delightful individuals and families who come here for reunions, graduations, funerals, skiing, holidays. In fact, our own family just ended our reunion yesterday. We've hosted high school girls softball team and professionals here for work. We've helped a neighbor with a birthday party when the weather was bad. And overall, it's good experience with good people. Our freedoms as citizens are decreasing daily. Don't contribute to it. Rather, please create a win-win situation that allows everyone their rights. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hopkins. Anyone else?
I'm Tracy Wagner and a North Logan resident since October of 2017. I understand the concerns of the balancing. We're trying to balance a lot of different things, a lot of different concerns, but as stated, the residents are not being represented, I think in general, in what people are thinking and feeling. And just even, for example, this evening, there was a post on Facebook. If I hadn't signed up and had been listening to your previous meetings, I would not even know what was going on. And to have this meeting just show up with not a lot of notice, it wasn't in the newsletter with these concerns. This is a big change that's going to affect many, many residents, whether they currently have their permits and should and don't, or whatever. I don't feel like you're getting the overall feeling of your North Logan residents that you represent. And that concerns me. I feel like, with what has been going on, like, can I not park on my street? I went down the street of the individuals that have brought this all about, and there were 6 cars on that street and a trailer from the neighbors, like parked in front of their home and all the way up and down the street. And yet we don't go running to our neighbors and come to the city like, oh my goodness, my neighbors are parking in front of my house. I feel like there's just injustice that's happened. And my other concern with having to do with parking is that when I go to vacation homes by owners or Airbnbs with my family, we are told only 3 cars can park in this residency. That's normal for any place that I have gone. There's a limitation. And if you're going to have more cars than that, you need to park somewhere else and shuttle each other. That's the way it goes. But if you have somebody coming to visit you and they're parking on the road, then you've got the neighbors upset. They're not staying there, they're visiting.
Thank you. Thank you. Anyone else?
Hi, my name is Tim Tolbert. I want to talk about a couple of things. First off, I'm for property rights, property owners. Your job as a planning commission is to first and foremost represent the current residents. I have heard this repeated theme of we need to create affordable housing because there is a housing shortage and a housing crisis in the country and in the state, but it is not your responsibility to worry about the people you're bringing into North Logan. It's your responsibility to represent the residents who live here today. So that's first thing. Second thing, I'm against these conditional use permits across the board. Conditional use permits open the door for arbitrary and unfair, unbalanced enforcement, okay? Everybody should be able to build a detached dwelling if they want to, and if they want to rent it out short-term, they should be able to do that. Next thing is short-term rentals. With this housing crisis, you're completely ignoring a whole category of people. My daughter, who's low income, lives out of short-term rentals because long-term rentals actually cost more. She can shop around, get deals, and book a week at a time. It's a nomad lifestyle. She lives that way. A lot of young people are living that way. So you should not be restricting short-term rentals. If there are concerns about parking, pedophiles, loud noises, fences, all that kind of stuff, there are already laws and ordinances in place, state, national, local. If you do not like having short-term rentals in your neighborhood, create an HOA or move to an HOA and let the HOA handle the individual property uses that way. People who do not live in HOAs do not want that extra onerous oversight. Next thing, long-term rentals are actually sometimes less beneficial to property owners. I own 2 rental properties. Sometimes the long-term rentals are actually harder for me because once someone gets into a long-term rental, they've been in over 30 days, you have no protection. Short-term rentals actually offer more protection and they offer win-wins.
Thank you.
Across the board.
Thank you. Anyone else?
And on my last note, my name is Janae Hopkins. I want to talk about a couple of issues. First, the short-term rental. The state is extremely tolerant and encouraging of both ADUs and short-term rentals. When you make it a conditional use, you open yourselves up to different interpretations at different times by different commissions. Ambiguity in code has caused major issues, so I implore you to tread carefully and consider how future property owners and how future commissioners will understand what you're doing today. The current code is working. I don't understand what the problem is that you're trying to solve. I asked Scott Perks ahead of time for some stats, and I would hope that you would encourage him to share those with you. There have been 2 complaints about short-term rentals in last year. One of them was ours, which was then resolved. So there was really only one complaint. So I really don't understand what the point is. The code is working as it is right now. Short-term rentals create tax revenue for North Logan City. So if you're looking to do what's best for everybody, I would think short-term rentals would be better than long-term, as there's no tax revenue driven from that. Please don't restrict what portions can be short-term rental or restrict rights. It doesn't make sense to do that. You can't tell somebody where to live on their own property. It doesn't make sense to tell them what can be rented and what can't, and for what period of time and what not, if it's allowed in other areas. But my darling child is to talk about the ADUs. Since you're on the topic of cleaning up text in municipal codes regarding ADUs, I would encourage you to take this opportunity to clarify your code section 12C 515.2.3 and eliminate the verbiage gross area. The new interpretation used to prove today in the meeting minutes by the Planning Commission is inconsistent. Use permits have been granted for buildings that are larger than a gross square footage area of 1,500 square feet by past commissions. Repeatedly, I've spoken to 2 previous commissioners. They said they always understood that portion to be the apartment square footage cannot exceed 1,500 square feet. There are many throughout North Logan. The property rights ombudsman for the state of Utah has said that you can only look at sewer, parking, and noise.
Thank you, Mrs. Hopkins. Okay, anybody else?
My name is Chris Johnny. I've been in North Logan for about 5 years now. Speaking for short-term rentals, I do own one, and as what was said before about bringing money to North Logan, the groups that we've had, almost all of them have been from out of the area that come into the area. Not only do they help us, but grocery stores, little shops, you name it. It's a supporting the community that long-term or short-term rentals bring into the community, not just tax revenue. Also, there was a comment made earlier about grandfathering. And so whenever something goes out about grandfathering, I would like to know exactly what that means and what grandfathering does. A lot of the things that have been brought up has brought up more and more and more questions, and grandfathering is one of those. So I'd urge you to be pretty specific with that also. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Get up to the microphone.
My name is Matthew Krishnisnik. I've lived in North Logan since 2002. I've been in Cache Valley since 1996. And I would just like to echo the comments that have already been made. I think there's been an overreach by this council and by the city to try to control what property owners can and can't do. We have codes in place that make sure that our houses and detached dwelling units are livable and acceptable for people to live in, and having conditional use permits and all these other things to me is just an overreach of power.
Thank you. Anyone else?
My name is Michelle Johnny, and I live here in North Logan, and we own an Airbnb here in North Logan. And I am nervous about the conditional use because I see a little bit of hypocrisy. What we can do compared to what our neighbors can do. Our people can't believe that they can't park a car on the street for, after a funeral. Not everyone's LDS. Not everybody has a church to go to eat at. And when a family rents an Airbnb, they might have a few extra people come over for a dinner, and they can't have that because they can't park on the street. But people next to both of our house, they've got three cars parked over here, trailer here, and I'm getting in trouble for, they're complaining. And I get it. I try as hard as I can to get our guests to park in the driveway and, everything like that. But we've had Air Force Academy rugby team. Our Airbnb is 7,100 square feet. And it does a lot of good for the community. Often there's a tie. We have professional groups. We've had the Repertory Dance Company, and people that need a gathering place to eat and to sleep. And I'm nervous about this, but I also see like the hypocrisy. My mom lives in the villas. She's 79 years old. And every day I go to my mom's house, I see cars up and down 4th East. There is no place for my mom to ride her tricycle because that medical building has 50, let's see, I counted today, 34 cars on the street.
Okay, thank you.
My mom broke her wrist falling last week.
Thank you for your comments. We appreciate it. Anyone else? All right, we'll close the public hearing. Thank you for your comments and your thoughts. Commission, I think we have to focus back down on what we're doing here tonight. And what we're supposed to be doing is thinking about the text changes in this code to make it clear. Any comments?
Commissioners, if it might be helpful, as far as what your direction can be and what decisions you can and can't make. So as a commission, you can waive public comment. You can review the comment based on the text. You can mull over those comments. We can add more language, strike language. This is very malleable at this point. This is a draft, right? This is the reason why we have public hearings. Now we've had other meetings in the past with very different public comments. And so it's good to have this balance of comments. This is a great example of democracy at work where we're here to review policy, in a public setting before it moves forward. And so we have a draft in front of us. Now it is in draft form. You guys are able to request adjustments if you would like to look at certain areas. I'm happy to clarify any concerns or comments that may have stuck out in your minds based on the public comments. We can table this and come back to it. We can make a motion today if you would like a recommendation on what is in the draft today. Your motion can say, I have a positive recommendation, so long as certain aspects are changed, or I have a negative recommendation because of whatever it is that concerns you. So that's to give you some direction on what you can and can't do going forward at this point.
Thanks, Scott. Okay. Heather, you look like you have a question, comment.
I maybe just feel differently than everyone. I don't know, but I appreciate all the opinions from all the meetings we've had on this. It's been really enlightening, and thank you everyone for being here. All the meetings. I personally, this is my feel, and as a citizen of North Logan, but I do feel like the language is shifted. I think we had some concerns with initially with square footage and how that looked in the beginning that was really ambiguous and confusing as we were talking through, but then I do feel like it's kind of taken a different shift in my mind. And so I'm not opposed to short-term rentals. And so maybe I feel differently than everyone else up here. And so I think that's something where I personally wouldn't mind some of the language shifting. Again, maybe I feel differently than everyone else, but just figuring out like details of some of this is where I don't know.
I don't think we're saying here we oppose short-term rentals.
No,
I don't think that
that's
says
good.
this at all.
Okay, so
I was just going to say, a conditional use permit does not give the commission latitude to arbitrarily
yes,
grant or deny those permits. It's still an administrative action that we're bound to approve if they
Right.
meet those conditions and meet the code. So
And talk with the applicant if we have
Just ensure-
concerns.
I just would want to
So
make sure
this
there's
language,
that.
this
yeah.
language to me doesn't say, get rid of short-term
Yeah.
rentals. We don't
As long
think that. But I think, just what Kenny said, a conditional use permit gives us an opportunity to see what the feelings are, the intent. It's not saying you can't do this.
Just increase the regulation. Take that Mark Green's report. It attaches strings.
It doesn't attach strings. Anyway,
I heard him say it attaches strings.
we
can review.
we are done with the public comment. Thank you. Okay. We have codes, different regulations in our code. But to get back to the conditional permit on short-term rentals, in my opinion, that doesn't mean we get rid of short-term rentals. I think it just means the applicant, the board, that the commission has a chance to talk about it with the applicant, see where they're going. That's what I think.
I think the other
Gavin?
challenge we have here, oh, sorry.
Oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Gavin.
It's hard for me.
Either way, I don't mind. Me?
Yeah, go ahead, Kevin.
So, well, based upon the public comment, I've got 6 or odd questions that I'd like to get clarity on from the intention from the language. And
Yeah.
so if there's other general comments, we can do that first, but I've got some specific comments questions to discuss, so.
Any general comments before we get into
Yeah,
questions?
I have one, and that is maybe a couple. As Heather was saying, I don't think we're trying to limit short-term rentals. I think the previous language in this section was very ambiguous. That's why we started to make some changes to identify some of those areas which were ambiguous to. So if someone came in and wanted short-term rentals, they can look at this and it can spell out for them what they need to, or long-term rentals. And the state passed the law about low-income housing, and we need to increase that. That's what some of this is detailing too. And so we're trying to work through all of these things and put it into a document that we can ratify and go forward with as a community.
And that
So-
we can comply with the state regulations too.
I
That's
think-
something we have to do.
I think that's what I was gonna say. It's important to recognize, like, the push for using detached ADUs to relieve the stress on the housing availability right now is not coming from this commission. That's coming from our state legislature.
Yeah.
So if you disagree with that, and encourage you to write your elected state representatives, because we're just trying to comply with what's being pushed out upon us from the state.
And what we're trying to do is make the language clearer and fair and clear. So any more general comments before we get to Gavin's questions? Thank you, Aaron. That was,
I guess I have one in that area with one comment, is that's the one that Gavin brought up about specifying the language. I think we need to do that.
I would be curious to know like what the grandfathering does mean, because I do think that was raised multiple times, and just the people who currently have housing and stuff, just like what the grandfathering does until, like, if we say they're grandfathered in, and maybe that's not something for this conversation, but.
I had that down too, Heather, and the other one I had down for Mr. Whitaker as to how much additional or alterations would be necessary if you're going to change. It wasn't Mr. Whitaker, change a building enough and to change the classification of that building. Is there anywhere that it states that? You remove a 2 before you remove a wall, does that change the classification?
Let me answer as we go. Changing the interior configuration of the building doesn't change use. So land use is different than physical structure. So if they use it for a different purpose, then that changes the land use, and that could change what the permitting or the requirements are. So going from a long-term rental to a short-term rental is a different use of the property. So it could change the permitting if the permitting is different. So if we have a conditional use permit on a short-term rental and it's a permitted use on a long-term rental, then if they change the use, then they would have to change the permitting to make that use of the property.
Okay, one thing I really like about this new language is changing the detached from a conditional use to a permit. That makes sense to me. I think people would like that idea. It makes sense to me. But anyway, Gavin,
Yeah.
let's hear your questions.
So, all right, so grandfather, I wanted to kind of dive into that a little bit. So I didn't, I guess that's first. So from staff and say enforcement side of things, what does grandfathering look like?
So let's just take a real world example. A short-term rental that is currently permitted today, they have a business license to short-term permit. They can continue renewing that permit annually. And that is grandfathered as long as they continue renewing and they continue their use as it's currently operating. However, if they lapse that business license and let's say they take a year or two off, and then they want to come in and restart that use, that land use, they would then have to comply with the regulations that are adopted at that point in time. So if we make a change to conditional use permit for short-term rentals, somebody who has previously permitted under a business license to operate a short-term rental that has lapsed and has not renewed their business license would then have to come back to the city for a conditional use permit and comply with the standards that are currently codified at that time, whatever they may be. If they've changed, then they would have to comply with what the changes may be. If they haven't changed, then they would just continue to move forward as originally. So let's say that we don't make any changes to short-term rentals and they continue to be a permitted use with a business license. If they lapse their business license, they could just pick up a new business license in a couple of years and begin operating again, because that's the current language if it remains unchanged.
So to be grandfathered in, you have to have a current business license for a short-term rental.
Correct.
So
If any changes were to occur going forward, they would be able to operate under the original approval as long as they continue that use.
So operating a short-term rental without a business license, doesn't qualify you as grandfather.
Yeah. Yep. We know we have a few out there that are not permitted. They haven't really jumped out on our radar because they haven't had any code enforcement issues. So we haven't reached out to them to ask them proactively to become licensed. But if they wanted to abide by the current requirements, they would, under today's language, have to come and get a business license to obtain that grandfather status if something were to change in our code governing that land use.
I'm sorry if I didn't write down names, but Bill had asked or had mentioned in his comments about potentially part-time moving. The term snowbirding I've heard before. So I know in the current code that it mentions those that may take extended leave of being a resident. Is that language still in, or has that been struck in the?
So that's been stricken mostly because as I read through it, the snowbirding aspect is extremely hard for the city to track and enforce. Under the existing language, they actually have to come to the city, tell us that they're taking an extended leave of absence and that they would like to push pause on their permit. From an enforceability standpoint, that's nigh impossible for us to track and keep, a record of. So I viewed this as an opportunity to simplify that and just say, if you have a bona fide absence, then you're good to go. There's still some of that language in there, but it doesn't have the requirement that they come to the city, let us know how long they're going to be out of town or what have you, because it's just unenforceable language.
So the language is it to have somebody living in your accessory dwelling unit, attached or detached. You need to live there as well.
Correct.
And
Under today's language.
On today's language.
Uh-huh.
So specifically, in the proposed language, that's still the case, but the burden of proving that you're there is lower.
Yeah, under today's language, if you have a detached accessory dwelling unit and you have a long-term tenant residing in that dwelling unit and you have a conditional use permit to operate that detached accessory dwelling unit, you'd have to come into the city and tell us that you're going to be gone for an extended period of time. Otherwise, you would be potentially at risk of losing that conditional use permit for that detached accessory dwelling unit. And it just seems strange to kick a long-term tenant out of their dwelling just because somebody took, a 6-month snowbird trip down to St. George or wherever without notifying the city prior. It didn't make sense. So that was stricken under this proposal.
So if you can, I can't find it in the 50 pages. Can you let me know what the reference is for the?
Yeah, let me find it here. Jump over to page 43 of the staff report. This is the existing language that is proposed to be stricken.
Yeah, so I can,
Which line?
so I can see that this is, a large section is stricken here. So does it also strike the requirement? It looks like it may. That to have a long-term renter in an accessory dwelling unit, there's no tie to you actually being there any longer.
As far as you occupying the property as a property owner,
As the primary resident, yeah.
that is still a requirement. That's a requirement in the existing language and in the proposed language, that if you have an accessory dwelling in it, it still has to be occupied by the primary owner.
Okay.
It's
all
still
right.
single family residential zoning in most of these cases. Actually, all of these cases. And so you do have to own the property, reside on the property. It can't be multifamily. We can't turn these into duplexes where we have two unrelated individuals renting different dwelling units and the owner not be present. That would be the definition of multifamily
Sure.
zoning. So we're not changing the zoning from single family. So that requirement remains in both the existing and the proposed language.
Okay, thanks. Ms. Janae Hopkins mentioned gross area. Is that in the stricken section now?
It's been modified. So as you guys may recall, we've had some issues with that language being ambiguous and a little bit tricky for us to wrap our heads around. So the language has been modified, and we talked about in our last work session. Let me find it here so we can all look at it at the same time. Okay, so the existing language is going to be on page.
Scott, when you reference your page numbers, there's actually 2 page numbers on every page. Can you just clarify if you're,
Yeah, there's page numbers for the staff report as a whole, and then there's page numbers for the exhibit itself. So the staff report as a whole is on the bottom
bottom
right.
Yep,
Yeah, so maybe I'll reference those bottom right page
Okay,
numbers for you.
sounds good.
Okay. Okay, so the original language is on page 46 of the staff report.
There's so much.
And this is that first or the second paragraph down about midway. Where we're talking about the gross area not exceeding 1,000 square feet or 1,500 square feet if it's part of a garage. So that language, because it's been problematic, is being stricken. The way that this red line is drafted, because the proposal anticipates a change from a conditional use permit for a detached accessory unit to a permitted use. It's been pulled out of the conditional uses section and placed under its own section with the internal accessory dwelling unit. So that's why this whole section appears to be stricken. But what it really is it's been removed from this location in the code and moved into a permitted section if we were to move forward with permitting detached accessory dwelling units as a permitted use instead of a conditionally permitted use. So here's where that existing language is, but let's hop to where the proposed language moves it to, which is just 1 page over in the staff report. So it's on page. Oops, sorry, that's short-term rentals. It's going to be back just a little bit.
page 39, I think.
No, we're actually, well, maybe so. Yep,
Area. Yeah.
Commissioner Reese wins the race. Page 39.
Yeah.
Okay, yep. Okay, so this is going to be about midway down the page for B. This is the new language. So it keeps some of the language, but then redrafts it for clarity. So when we're talking about the area of an accessory dwelling unit, we're talking about a proposed attached accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 50% of the building footprint, including attached garage of the primary single-family dwelling.
Excellent.
And then B, we're talking about the detached here. So B, a proposed detached accessory dwelling unit shall not exceed 50% of the building footprint, including attached garage of the primary single-family dwelling up to a maximum gross area of 1,000 square feet. If a conditioned dwelling area associated with a detached accessory dwelling unit is entirely contained above a garage space, then the entire detached structure, garage and detached accessory dwelling unit above shall not exceed a maximum gross area of 2,000 square feet. So we're cleaning this up by not saying the garage has to be associated with a primary single-family home. It's just a garage. It could be used by the primary dwelling. It could be used by the accessory dwelling. But if it does incorporate garage space and the living space for the dwelling unit is entirely above, then we'll go up to 2,000 square feet.
Yeah.
But if it's internal to the home, if it's an attached accessory dwelling unit, then it's 50% of the footprint. So that allows for you to convert the entirety of a basement or the entirety of an upstairs, 2-story home. But that's the cap is 50%.
And the 2,000 square foot is a growth from 15.
It's slightly larger. Yep. Now, keep in mind, there are still lot coverage ratios elsewhere in the land use code that prevent the entirety of a backyard from being covered in rooftops. So there's some governing language to make sure there's still some yard space and we don't have a lot that's entirely covered with structures.
So, so just a little bit of data for me to help me understand. So, do you know about how many short-term rental permits exist in the city?
Right now, we have two. We have two short-term rental permits. We have one more that is in the hopper and should be approved here shortly. But we have two that are formally issued business licenses for short-term rentals.
Okay, and complaints per year?
So I've only been here a year tracking these complaints, but in this past year, we've had two properties with multiple complaints on those two properties. I've only opened one code enforcement file for each of those properties, but we've had multiple neighbors for each of those. So two properties that have had open code complaints against them, but multiple complaints on those two.
And I don't expect you'll have an answer to this one, but by a search of, I'll say, popular short-term rentals websites, do you have an idea of how many are actually operating in the city?
So this is hard to judge because when you look on a short-term rental website, you have to enter in specific dates and some dates may be blacked out at certain properties. But as I looked on both VRBO and Airbnb for a couple of different windows of time later in the summer, there's anywhere between 10 to 20 properties that I saw pop up. Roughly. It's really hard to get an estimate off of just looking at those listings. Could be much more.
Could be.
You're right.
Can you talk to him after? We're done here?
So keep in mind, public meetings like this have a certain decorum and there's certain procedures. We want to make sure we keep this as civil and organized as we can. There is the formal public hearing. Happy to chat with you about some of those details afterwards. Happy to answer any questions that the commission may want to do. But just keep in mind, the commission and the chairman of the commission will direct what discussion is had and when. Okay.
Thanks. Okay. Any more questions,
I
Gavin?
have just two more. So a comment was made about by Michelle Johnny, hopefully I got the names right, about parking during the daytime for potentially a meal of a large group that may not stay there the evening while occupying the residency. Is there when looking at, say, complaints from parking and things of that nature, are there particular hours that those apply, or they apply throughout any time of the day, or
So the way that the code currently reads is that they are required to provide a certain number of off-space parking spaces. It does not specifically state that those guests have to be parked on-site and off-street.
Right.
That's our current code. Now, there is language elsewhere in our code that during the winter months, during certain hours of the day, there's, the winter parking that everybody has to comply with regardless of the use. But for short-term rentals and detached accessory dwelling units, our current code doesn't mandate that they stay off the street. The proposed language does. Now, if there's a concern about, whether we do or don't allow it, that's a discussion we can have and an adjustment in the proposal if you so feel we should make that change. But right now, the language indicates that for both detached accessory dwelling units and short-term rentals, all the parking associated with those two uses shall be on-site and off-street at all time.
And so what we're discussing is right now, short-term rentals are a permitted use. This proposed draft is moving that to a conditional use. And part of the reasoning for that is potential concern from nearby residents of why that's driving that. And so I guess one of my question is that is there a difference? Say in the current place, if you get a business permit to run a short-term rental and there are code enforcement complaints about the use of the property, can the city use that code enforcement complaints to pull the business license?
They can. So if, for example, there's repeated offenses that can be verified and there's no resolution to those offenses, we could go down a route where we pull the business license. Or if we issue a conditional use permit, if we were to adopt this language and require conditional use permits, it would be the same. If they're out of compliance with those standards and any conditions that might be imposed, then through the code enforcement process, we could revoke the conditional use permit.
So either a permitted use or a conditional use, there is a path for, say, repeated code enforcement issues
due to violations,
yeah.
Yep.
To revoke either the business license or the conditional use permit.
Correct.
And so going to a conditional use permit allows the planning commission to weigh in on the use, that specific use, considering the property, its layout, and the request, and within the code, levy requirements upon its use. So that's really the essential difference between the two.
Yeah, the way that it's drafted, there are specific standards that would be applicable to any short-term rental that is requested. But with the conditional use permit process, it allows the planning commission to look at unique variables associated with any particular request or property and say, what potential impacts might there be? What reasonably anticipated impacts might there be that need to be mitigated? And the planning commission can impose conditions to mitigate those reasonably anticipated impacts, but they cannot impose conditions to eliminate those impacts. That's directly from state code that governs how conditional use permits are issued. And the planning commission may only deny a conditional use permit if there is no way for the property owner to meet a particular standard, or there are conditions that simply cannot, I forget the terminology specifically, but that are so impactful that there are no conditions that can reasonably mitigate that impact. So it has to be a pretty serious impact that simply just there's not a condition that can reasonably mitigate it. Those are the only two circumstances where a planning commission can outright deny a conditional use permit. It is a property right. It is a permitted use, but conditionally permitted if indicated as such for that land use in our zoning code. So it allows for a little bit more oversight with the planning commission, allows for someone to at least look at it and say, this is something unique about the property. We think this condition needs to be applied to mitigate a reasonably anticipated impact, but then it can be granted with that condition.
But the code could be written, so if we chose to say, as a city, the whole city process, don't mean just us, but if the city were to go through this process and leave short-term rentals as a permitted use, the code could also state the typical concerns that are raised about parking and allowed parking spaces and
Yep.
and do all those things.
We could just have a set of standards that everybody has to comply by in order to obtain their business license. And if they're out of compliance with those standards, then the code enforcement process could pull that business license.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Thanks. That's all my questions right now.
Thank you.
That was good.
Karen,
I've got one more. There was one about the snowbird situation. If a person from here goes to St. George or wherever out, and they want to convert their home to a short-term rental, do they have to go to the city and get a permit to do that? Or can they just say, all right, I'm gonna advertise this, you can come in and you can rent, I'm gonna be gone, and you can rent it for this long, I'll be back, so be cleared by that time.
Yeah. So under today's standards, if let's say that they spend 6 months in a snowbird location, they could long-term rent their property on a six-month lease. And it's kind of a short, long-term lease, but they could do that as would be considered long-term. They would not have to get any kind of license or permit from the city. But if they wanted a short-term rent while they are away from home, they would have to come and get a business license. That's under today's code. Under the proposal, if they wanted to snowbird for several months in short-term rent, they would need to get a conditional use permit. Now, they could come to the city under a conditional use permit and say, we anticipate being gone on an annual basis, at least 6 months out of the year during the winter months. And that could be part of the consideration for the issuance of that conditional use permit. So it'd be anticipated by the intended use of the property.
Thank you for that clarification. I
Thanks.
did have that question.
Yep.
any other questions?
I don't have any other questions.
So, what we need to figure out is if we are happy, if we are ready to give a positive recommendation to this to the city council, or if we need to add some concerns. Like Gavin said earlier,
I think we're all in agreement that at a minimum, if the motion is to approve, it would be conditionally approve, assuming that text is added to address the transition from long-term rental to short-term rental.
And that's if you feel comfortable making a recommendation tonight. You can table it and say,
yeah.
bring back language for us to review at the next meeting. That's an option as well. Or you can have a negative recommendation on the current draft and say it's a negative recommendation unless language is added to address the short-term conversion to long-term or vice versa.
Yeah, I would,
I think that's,
oh, sorry.
go ahead.
what?
You're wording, go ahead.
I'm not personally comfortable recommending it to the board or to the city council in its state. And so, I think we need to consider some of the ambiguities that brought up earlier about if you transfer from one type to another type and those kind, I think we need to get that set. And I wasn't here during other comment periods, but for this issue earlier in the year, but I guess I'm not seeing the number of complaints justify going to conditional use permit. I think if we have a business, if we have a permitted use and they get a business license and there's complaints from neighbors that are actually violations of the code, then the business license can be pulled. So
I will throw out there though, pulling the business license, I don't know, like it sounds like of the anecdotally 20-ish that are in the city right now, only 2 of which have a business license. So pulling the business license doesn't necessarily enforce.
So
the
there's
use,
another
but-
mechanism. So if somebody is short-term renting without a license, we can open code enforcement and say, you are operating a short-term rental without the appropriate business license. And so we can open code enforcement and say you need to become licensed. And you need to abide by whatever standards may exist in our code to allow that license to be issued. So another idea or consideration is we could just keep it as permitted, but beefing up our standard requirements for these types of uses to perhaps preemptively mitigate some of those impacts that we may anticipate may be normal or standard across this type of a land use. That's an approach you could take as well. That may be a little bit less heavy-handed, but as short-term rentals grow and proliferate, it may be nice to have the ability to look at it through a conditional use permit. Maybe we're not to that point yet, but maybe we are. It's a policy decision we'd have to make as a community on that. But another idea for consideration, it's drafted with a conditional use permit, but it could just be drafted with a permitted use. But we could make our standards a little bit more robust if there's certain concerns we want to make sure every short-term rental abides by. We can also do that as standard requirements under a conditional use permit, but then just give the planning commission the ability to impose specific conditions as it's seen needed. So
I don't know, if they're not willing to go and get a business license or don't know to, or whatever the reason they aren't, I don't know as if they're going to come get a conditional use permit either.
That's true.
Yeah.
until a concern is brought up by a member of the public and code enforcement opens up on them and we say, you need to come get a conditional use permit,
exactly,
or
yeah.
you need to come and get a business license. That's usually when they say, oh, I didn't know that was even a requirement. A lot of folks just don't know. Some do, and they're just like, yeah, I'll deal with it if it becomes an issue.
So, and so I think if there were, say, you know, if we had more complaints, you could take them and list them and say 80% of our complaints are parking related and 5% of this. And then you could put into the code the part, you know, the big ones. I'm just wondering if there's enough variability that it requires a deeper look of a conditional use permit. I don't know.
As far as number of complaints goes, I didn't think we got clarification. We just heard that there were 2 business licenses, each of which had multiple complaints, but multiple doesn't clarify to me how many that is.
Let's clarify. So earlier this year, we did not have any business licenses issued for short-term rentals. We had complaints from neighbors that then opened up a code enforcement file for particular properties, 2 short-term rental properties. The city issued letters to those properties saying, hey, you've got to come and get a business license. Both of those property owners did comply and do that. They both came in and became licensed. But it required for that code enforcement process to play out to bring them into the requirements that the city currently has. But of those 2 properties, we've had multiple complaints from multiple neighbors surrounding those properties. Many of them are repeat complaints from identical adjacent property owners. But it's not just one property owner complaining about the adjacent property. It's a few that are complaining about those properties.
Okay.
So I hope that clarifies. I haven't quantified the number of phone calls or emails that I've received on these 2 properties, but it's in the multiples.
I mean, I'm even getting emails, and even to my work email, people are finding my work email to complain about things like this. And so I don't even know how they're getting my work email, but
and just so the commission knows, if you do get, correspondence on your personal email, the best thing to do is to say those complaints need to be routed through the city first.
which I have done.
Yeah.
It's frustrating to me, though, that it's even coming to my work email in the first place.
Yeah.
But
Commissioners, before we wrap up this discussion, it's coming to my mind. We did have a public comment submitted via email a while back. I want to make sure that we don't forget, if we're okay to open up the public hearing to read this on the public record, I want to make sure we don't forget this, because I had indicated that I would make sure this became a part of the record. This was emailed out to the commission several weeks ago, so you may recall this. But this particular public comment did come in formally in writing, so I want to make sure it's part of the record. Chairperson Isaacson, would you like for me to read this? Would you like to read this? I'm happy to read it. Or how would you like to get this into the record?
I'm happy to read it, Scott, if you can hear it. Okay.
Good.
Planning Commission, hello, my name is Janessa Seeley. I'm writing because I'm concerned about some comments made in the most recent Planning Commission meeting. Mr. Scott Perkins made a comment that he does not see the need for public hearing when considering the conditional use permit for an ADU. It is, of course, the Planning Commission's prerogative to make the administrative decision on conditional use permits. It is the public, however, that bears the burden of decisions the Planning Commission makes. Therefore, the public should be allowed an opportunity to weigh in on any conditional use that directly affects them, thus the purpose of the notification radius observed by the city. The public should be allowed to make comments that are on the record
In a recent instance, public input and participation may have helped the city realize the need to address and modify some portions of the municipal code as relating to conditional use permits for ADUs. Without public input related to specific conditional use permitting, the planning commission would in the future forego the opportunity to fully appreciate the impact their decisions might make on the broader citizenry. In addressing updates and modifications to the municipal code, I would ask that you not remove the public hearing requirement as it pertains to conditional use permits. Also, with the most recent application / denial / appeal for an ADU conditional use permit, items in the municipal code were brought up by the public that were not addressed by the planning commission. A public hearing provides a forum for concerned citizens to remind the planning commission of the purposes and required findings as outlined in the municipal code. Such reminders would be very useful since the city staffer's report omitted the purposes section of the code. There were 4 items of the code relating to the purpose of the code that were brought up by the public in the hearing that were not addressed by the commission. They all pertain to the North Logan Code 12C 515.1 that states that the purpose of permitting accessory dwelling units is to provide homeowners with the means of obtaining through tenants and an accessory dwelling unit rental income, companionship, security, and / or services, and thereby to enable them to stay more comfortably in homes and neighborhoods they might otherwise be forced to leave. Add inexpensive rental units to the housing stock to meet the needs of smaller households, both old and / or young. Make housing units available to moderate and / or lower income households who might otherwise have difficulty finding housing within the city. Develop housing units in single-family neighborhoods that serve the needs of the residents through a variety of stages in the life cycle, thereby lessening fluctuations in neighborhood demand for services. The Planning Commission ought to be able to make findings of fact that relate not just to the requirements section, but also the purposes section of the code. Otherwise, why would the purposes section have been defined by previous administrations? The above items clearly stated in the North Logan City Municipal Code explain the intent of the remainder of that section of code. As a member of the public, I am perplexed at how both the city staffer and the Planning Commission appear to have glossed over the very purposes of the code. The specific findings that the Planning Commission would have to make in granting a condition.
This is way longer. You're going for 3-4 minutes. It's not fair. It's not fair.
Okay, we're done. We'll leave it up there and you can read it yourself. How's that? Tonight, I don't think we are addressing public hearings. No, that's nothing we're addressing. Tonight, our meeting is talking about this proposal. I don't think we're here saying we don't approve short-term rentals. We don't approve ADUs. We don't approve detached ADUs. That is not the purpose of this meeting tonight. The purpose of this meeting tonight is to talk about this proposal that we have before us. I appreciate the questions and the comments, and we're trying to work through this to make everybody happy. We're not here trying to beat people up. We're not here trying to say you can never do this. We're trying to make the language clear so everybody knows what is expected. We have certain requirements from the state that we have to do. And the government tells us that, and we have to do that. So that's something that we have to do. So tonight, as a commission, either we're ready to pass this on with a positive recommendation if we add these things, or we're not ready to pass it on. We want to talk about it a little bit more. We want to add a few of these things that we've talked about. That's what we as a commission need to decide. And I think it's probably time for us to make a decision one way or the other what we want to do tonight, unless there's any more questions.
Well, I would recommend, I think staff's done a very good job in the summary and background in the beginning here to take the 50 odd pages of the changes and summarizing it into roughly 8 to 10 top level bullet points. I think we might be able to go through that and maybe take a bit of a straw poll bullet by bullet, and if we're comfortable or not. And so some parts I'm very comfortable with and would like to move forward, and other parts I'm not. And actually one of the bullets is that yes, this change does talk about public hearings on conditional use permits. So that's part of this proposed change. So we should probably think that through. So I guess we can table this to a work session to talk through this item by item if we don't want to tackle it tonight. But I think some I'm comfortable with, some I'm not.
Okay.
So I think I benefit to go through.
Anybody else? Thank you, Gavin. I wasn't here at our last meeting. I don't know if you went through this or not, so
Started to.
We
Went through.
you went
went
through
through
it.
some of the red lines, but
It was so much that we were like,
It wouldn't be the
You
red
did a
lines.
good
If
job
you-
getting
We could
through.
just go through the bullets, the major pieces. I think it's a good
Right.
summary of the red lines.
I guess, Gavin, I'm tempted to move that we table the recommendation of city council right now and then go through those bullets point by point in a
Yeah.
work session the next at
Yeah.
at a near future meeting.
You want to make that a form of motion?
Is everybody okay with that? I mean, I
prefer to
agree
move.
with
I
what
prefer to.
Kenny and Devin have.
So just to be clear, we have a motion on the table. Is there a second to
We
that?
don't, we don't have a motion.
I
yet.
didn't formally move
Okay.
that. I was just saying that would be my hunch,
And-
but
And
that was a
I
fake.
wanted to discuss with the commission still.
before you do that, I hope everybody has read through this. It's a long thing to read
Yeah.
through.
I have.
But, you know, we can't sit here and talk about it if we haven't read through it all. And there is parking. All of this stuff is suggested in this thing, and you're all perfectly willing to read it too. The public can read it. So before we get beat up on things, know what's in there, okay? All right. So are you ready to
Okay,
make a
so
motion?
I move that we table any recommendation of the city council and then work through this in a work session in a future planning commission meeting.
Second,
Okay, so Kenny has moved that we table this for now, that we work through the bullet points in a work session and not send it on to the city council yet. And who seconded it? Heather? Gavin? Gavin seconded that. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. Thank you. Let's move on to number 2. And thank you for your comments. We're ready for another public hearing here. Scott, you want to tell us about number 2?
Yeah, so this particular item is a little bit different in its scope. So it is still a legislative item, but it's not a zoning text amendment. It is a general plan amendment to our 2013 general plan. The particular item here is an element. It's our third chapter or our third element in the general plan, which is our transportation element. There's an exhibit in that element called our roads transportation master plan. It's basically a map that depicts where roads are in the city and where roads should be in the city as future development occurs and how we get, good adequate access to various parts around town. I'm going to open this up here real quick. We do have a staff report, but I do feel like it's probably easier to talk through with the exhibits as they're graphical and we can kind of point out what is what and what is being proposed. So this particular exhibit, Exhibit A, is just a copy paste of the exhibit as it was adopted in 2013. Okay. So this is a page out of the general plan. That's what was adopted at the time. But what we have done over the years is there's been minor amendments that have occurred through appropriate legislative action. So it's come before the Planning Commission with a recommendation. The City Council then reviewed that recommendation and passed an ordinance to amend various portions of this exhibit. But unfortunately, the city did not do a great job of codifying or graphically depicting those adjustments that were passed via ordinance on the exhibit in the master plan. So this is the existing plan. Looking at Exhibit B, this just shows all of the amendments that have been made to date, but just haven't been updated on the exhibit graphically to depict those changes. So this Exhibit B is actually our current roads and transportation master plan. If we were to just update it based on past actions and put that out there saying this is actually the most accurate depiction of our transportation master plan. So we want to make sure that this is being updated because as we know, our city is going to be going through a general plan update process here in the next couple of months. So staff is looking at this. We want to get this just cleaned up brought up to where it's actually adopted, so that when we do go through the general plan process, we are looking at current and accurate existing conditions and existing planning documents before we then expound upon those through the general plan rewrite process. Okay. So hopping over to Exhibit C is an update to this master plan. So these are new changes that we would like to make to this plan, some of which are just to clarify and to make it a little bit more legible, and others are true amendments. So going through this, I'm going to go through the staff report in the background, and we'll just kind of go from top to bottom so everybody knows what is included on this third exhibit. This is the exhibit that if it were to move forward would then become our transportation and roads master plan going forward. Okay. So in Exhibit B, we use these symbols with yellow circles and crossed X's through them. And a lot of people were thinking that these were just indications of an intersection, but that's not actually the case. What these indicate is a change in road classification. So as you'll notice, this one, for example, it changes from purple to green. That's going from a major arterial classification down to a minor arterial classification. And that was confusing to a lot of folks. And so in the updated exhibit, we've just stricken those because it's clear when the color changes, the classification changes. We don't need that symbol. But what we did do is we did go ahead and just add traffic light symbols to show where intersections are. And we added roundabout symbols where existing or future roundabouts are proposed. And then obviously existing intersections are just across. It's just a four-way stop, for example. Okay, so these are changes just for legibility and just clarity and being able to identify what's going on in the exhibit. Okay, so that's first couple of bullet points there. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Another adjustment is this section down here in the southwest portion of town. So this is 2nd West and about 1800 North. This area actually was part of the city at one point, and there was a land swap with Logan City. So this area is no longer in the North Logan City municipal boundary. So we went ahead and just cleared this off because it's no longer applicable. We did, however, leave this 3100 North alignment, even though portions of it come in and out of North Logan's boundary. So for example, this area is actually in Hyde Park's jurisdiction. We felt like it would be okay to leave it on because we have 2 existing roundabouts and then a future roundabout at about 12th East and 3100 North. So still adds context. Didn't feel like we needed to remove that. We clarified this railroad. This is an existing railroad that runs all the way along that western border with town. The previous exhibit just stopped short. It showed this railroad from here to here, and that doesn't really make sense because it does continue past. So we thought it would just make it a little bit clearer that it does in fact exist and it runs that full length. We are adding this segment of 66-foot wide minor arterial west of Main Street along the 2600 North alignment. And this is because given the parcel configuration out in this area and future potential development, it makes sense to have a road connection that connects Main over to 2nd West. So we'd like to add that connection. Other areas out here, you can kind of see there's existing development that would prohibit that road from continuing all the way through. And other mid-block areas where it doesn't make sense to put a mid-block connection. That one's new. This is being added to the plan in this proposal. Moving down, this particular adjustment is more of a clarification in our city center zoning ordinance, which incorporates the areas in this portion of town right here. The frontages on 2200 North are required to have what are called complete streets, which is a different design of a cross section that incorporates a little bit more pedestrian connectivity. So we've got some on-street parking, some wider sidewalks, and a few things that make it a little bit walkable, which was the intent of this city center zone. In the previous exhibit, I'm going to flip back here so you can cross compare. It shows this segment as green. So it's just a traditional 80-foot minor arterial. But that's inconsistent with our existing city center zoning requirement. And so if you look in the city center zoning ordinance, it actually requires this dashed orange, yellow, whatever we want to call it. This standard cross section continues all the way to this point with the IFA property. So in the proposal, we're clarifying that we're changing it from a solid green line to a dashed orange line to be consistent with our city center zoning ordinance. So that's why that changes there. Okay. The next item are these solid blue lines. These are actually existing streets, but they are a classification called rural road. They don't meet a traditional 66-foot wide cross section. And so they're substandard to that 66-foot collector standard. But they are existing city streets that are publicly dedicated, but they didn't have a classification. So the rural road classification was applied to them. We don't allow for new rural roads with new development. It's not an option for new developments, but we wanted to show them on the map as being rural so that we understand they're not the same type of a road as a traditional 66-foot road cross section. So these are clarifying adjustments to just state what is there now.
Is it a time to ask questions or?
Let me have one more bullet
Yeah,
point. Okay. And then lastly, we've made this mid-block connection on the 1400 east alignment between 2300 north and the future 2600 north. This is a mid-block crossing that we believe can be made because there is not development, existing development that prohibits that connection to be made. There's a lot of existing underdeveloped property in this area that could develop if the property owners were to choose to do so. But this is a connection we believe can and should be made. But making the connection further to the north is a little bit harder because there's existing homes on the frontage with 2500 north. This may still connect if in the future somehow, some way, someone purchases land up here and they redevelop and allow for the road to connect through. But it's not master planned. The city is not planning for that to happen. It could happen organically, but it's not master planned to do so. Okay, so that's in a nutshell. Going from Exhibit A, the existing originally adopted 2013 plan, Exhibit B showing all the changes we've made to date. We just have neglected to put them onto the graphical exhibit. And then Exhibit C is taking all of those existing amendments and adding a few more clarifications so that this is ready to be analyzed with our general plan rewrite. But it is an amendment to our general plan that does govern currently. So there is a very specific process for us to go through, including a public hearing before we make a recommendation.
Thanks for changing the numbers. So when I
Yeah.
turn it this way, I can read
More
it.
legible. We're hoping that as we go through the new general plan, we'll have a graphic designer put this together for us, and maybe it'll be even easier to read and more legible.
Scott, a question, these blue solid lines, are they roads or
They're
or
existing
is that
roads.
where the canals go?
You're talking about the lighter blue ones. These are the canals.
Okay,
Just there for context.
so where I'm lost on where the blue line was.
So right here, we've got
Just that
a
little piece
darker
right there.
blue. Yeah, it's just a different classification of.
Oh, yeah, the
green.
rural road.
Right here. Okay. So I'm not very intelligent, but
Yeah.
it's,
One thing to keep in mind, commissioners, as we go through the general plan rewrite, as we look at population projections, as we look at the long-term build out over the next 20 years of the city, we'll be looking at this again and saying, is there adequate access where we anticipate development going, yes or no? So there may be future changes to this within the next year or so, based on where the general plan takes us in open discussion with the public, planning commission, city council. So this is just bringing it up to a nice, clean point for us to then begin working off of in the new general plan.
I'm comfortable with that one.
Questions, Gavin?
Yeah, so the rural road designation in a plan is interesting. I mean, so are we saying that we're planning for this to always be a rural road?
There's no plan for us to increase or expand capacity on these roads. So for example, this 1000 East, this is a terminal dead end. There's no anticipated connection. This is all university owned
Okay,
land.
yeah.
It may develop, and if it does, then this would have to be brought up to a higher standard. The traditional standard being a 66-foot right of way. Same on 2500 North. The city does not anticipate this being a primary east-west connection from 16th East up into Wildercrest. That's reserved for 2300 North. 2300 North is the master planned east-west connection. This is a very substandard road. From its width to its composition to its sub base, it's all substandard. So it's more of a private lane, but it's technically publicly dedicated as a road. So there is public access on that lane to the cemetery, but it's not intended to function for additional connectivity on a master plan street route. So in the plan, it's being depicted as a rural road, but if anybody were to want to develop further on the rural road, it would have to be brought up to a standard like the 66-foot collector.
Yeah, which is why which is why I would hope that our plan would be to bring it to a road standard rather than sort of codify it as a rural road and now we can't change it because it's planned to be a rural road. Because there are other streets that I think don't meet the standard. So for like Mount Naomi Court, up higher, like 70.
Yeah.
So that there's no curb, no gutter, it's asphalt that kind of falls off to the side. That's not standard, but doesn't have a rural road designation.
Yeah, it doesn't even meet the rural road classification. So I think I understand what you're saying. Would it be your preference just to leave it off of this exhibit if it's not intended to be anything more than what it is now? Yeah.
Sorry, you suggesting, Gavin, remove that designation on the
Yeah,
update?
But are you saying we can't because it's already on there? Yeah, so it's just saying that this is just.
Well, if I go back to the amendments to date, E, there's no rural roads listed.
It might be that this exhibit B, amendments made to date should depict those, but don't. That might be an error on our end to not depict those on this exhibit B ahead of exhibit C.
Okay, I guess Mike, I would say, don't want to say our plan is to leave a road substandard with substandard grade and
Width.
and all those things and that's our plan and it's going to wither away though it's publicly owned. And I don't want to, I know there's a lot of politics around that one in particular on 25th, but during events where there's potential emergencies or shutdowns of roads, it would be nice to have a road to Wildercrest.
Yeah, currently there's not.
Yeah, I understand that, but what I'm saying is that section on exhibit C that is on 25th North and the other two, we're saying that they're a rural road in a plan, which means we don't have a plan to ever upgrade them.
Yes, they would be upgraded to that when they are developed.
The city would not be the one doing those improvements, though. It would be done by a developer. If they needed access off of those public roads, they would then be the ones required to do those improvements where it could be brought up above a rural road standard to a traditional collector standard.
Okay,
The city would
well,
not participate in that upgrade. This transportation master plan does indicate where the city may actually put some skin into the game and make these roads come to fruition through various means. There's a lot of other roads in town that exist, but they're brought as development occurs. So a developer wants to subdivide, they create those roads, they dedicate them as public roads, but they're not master planned roads, which is what these ones are. That makes sense.
So say 23rd North from 16th up to Wildercrest, that'll be paid for by developers without city funds. That's the plan.
That's right. Or the city could, if we needed it sooner than later, we could execute and do that if we felt like it was, a good use of dollars to make that happen for
Funds
whatever
and
public
grants and
purposes.
other things, sure.
Right. Alan, to clarify, these rural roads don't even meet the current rural road standard in the DSTM, correct?
One does, 1,000, the city had.
Yeah. So they could still be brought up even to this rural road standard. There in our design standards technical manual, there's cross sections for each of these road widths, for example.
Is there a rural road standard? in
There
that?
is. Yep.
Okay, all right.
That 1,000 east is not good.
Not if the university has anything to say about it, right?
It's not a good road. It's just a little thing.
They narrowed that
Hey,
thing down
any other
to cards.
concerns, questions?
No.
Okay. We'll have a public hearing on this one. On, open up the public hearing for the potential recommendation regarding a city initiative general plan amendment intended to update and modify the North Logan City Roads Transportation and Master Plan. Okay. Before you begin, please state your name for the record. Please speak into the microphone so that your comments can be recorded. Please limit your statements to 2 minutes. If you're also speaking on behalf of others, you may ask the chairman for more time. Please phrase your opinions in the form of statements, not questions. A public hearing is your opportunity to express your opinions to the planning commission. It is not a time to ask questions and expect dialogue between yourself and the commissioner's city staff. Please address your comments to the commission, not to the public. The commission might ask questions about your comments in order for them to better understand you. If you have questions or need to discuss an issue, please meet with the planning commission members or the appropriate city staff member before the public hearing where dialogue can take place. You may provide a written statement as your input for a hearing. You may read your entire statement or summarize it. The 2-minute limit applies. You may provide a copy of a written statement to the city recorder. He will make copies for the commission. Written comments, if a copy is provided, become a part of the public record, but are not included in the minutes of the meeting. All right. Anybody have any comments on the roads?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Dave Flandro. I've been a long time North Logan resident. I know I'm not supposed to ask questions, but I don't know how to turn it into a statement, but once this is approved, this goes as part of the Cache Valley Master Plan.
No, it's part of the North Logan City General Plan.
Okay, so does this map, as once approved, whatever its form is, does that then go to the county?
It could become part of regional transportation plans with the Cache MPO or the COG, but it's not, it doesn't govern what the county does to us. So we try to work collaboratively with regional partners with Hyde Park, Logan City, but also more broadly in Cache County as a whole for regional transportation issues. And sometimes they'll take individual communities' transportation master plans just to cobble together a larger regional transportation model to understand where is traffic going and how does it get from one place, point A to point B, cross jurisdictional boundaries. So in short, no, it doesn't go to the county as the county governing document, but it is gleaned upon by other municipalities and by regional transportation planners as they plan.
So I guess once approved, I would presume that this map would be publicly available.
It currently is. Yes, this is the general plan.
The old one, this is the new one.
This new one would become public. It would replace
That
the
one would be,
existing.
okay.
Mhm.
All right, good. Thank you. That's all.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else?
Janae Hopkins, I have a caution. In meetings, I've repeatedly heard comments from commissioners like you're not bad people or that you're getting beat up. I just want to make sure that you understand that public comment and expressing concern is not an attack. If you can't hear dissenting voices or expressed concerns, then maybe being a public official is too difficult. But I caution you not to act as though our comments are personally attacking you, and we will try not to act as though your decisions are not personally attacking us. Just a caution. I know that sounds snarky. I'm not trying to say it snarky, but it's really hard to hear that and then not, you know what I'm saying? You've got to be able to take public comment without feeling personally attacked or acting like.
Jane, do you have a comment to this particular item?
I don't. That's just a public comment.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else?
Tracy Wagner. I just have a comment and a concern in, I'm not sure how it works with the density of homes versus roads and kind of, I don't know what the configuration is for that necessity. But I would just urge, from my standpoint, I'm up in Mahogany Ridge. And when we had that bike race go through a few years ago that went up through Mahogany Ridge, we could not get to or from our homes that day, the entire day. I was told we would be able to, the police would let us through when the cyclers were not in motion during that section, but I was let in by one only to get stopped by the next. And other than four-wheeling through the Hyde Park to get to my home, that was the only way I could get to my home. So that is just a concern of mine, that area up there does not have enough exits for safety purposes, that if we were in an evacuation situation, there is like the 3100 that everybody comes to, and then there's two other ones, and then the Mahogany Ridge one, and they're all in that one section. But then you have all the other homes that are, you know, over farther that are south of there, still east, that all have to merge on those same roads. So I was told at one time that 2500 was going to end up being extended, but now I'm hearing that's not going to be extended, and that still does not solve the problem. We still do not have sufficient evacuation from that area of the city. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Anybody else? Okay, we'll close the public hearing. Commission. Comments from you.
We reviewed all these with
Hilo.
gentleman, I forgot, what was it?
Hilo.
Hilo, that's right.
Yep.
At the last meeting, and I think I had asked all my questions at that time.
Yeah, I think it looks good. Besides, if you're stuck in Mahogany. Ridge, guess.
I have a question that's not on here.
We'll just build it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I'll go to it.
Are you making a question? Or are you commenting? I can't hear you.
I'm just rambling. The people over there. I was wondering if Marie was going to bring us snacks next time. I'm just. Yeah, where was our pizza?
I have a road question. Can I ask this question? On Third East, that's the one that went all the way through to Green Canyon, right?
Which one?
Third East, is it third?
Second.
It's kind of third, it kind of meanders. So this is Wolfpack Way you're talking about, right?
But they opened it up past the pickleball court and all that, right? That road? So from 2500 north.
Yeah,
Where's
so from
Third
this,
East?
this point, here's 2500 and First East,
Not first, third,
third.
Third East.
Third doesn't really have
There's not really a third. There is a fourth.
What's the road?
Third does come through.
When they built the pickleball
From
court,
2600.
they opened up the road. That's Third East.
2630.
Third East. I've had people that live on that road wonder if it's reasonable to ask, or would it ever happen to have speed bumps on there?
Oh, you're talking about people going to this little parking lot to then
Yeah.
to go.
No, just going all along from 2500 to
It's a
Third
residential.
to the park.
Yeah,
Zooming
you're talking
down that
about
road.
this little Third East, right? And then
Yeah.
this parking lot back here.
Yeah,
for
that
next
goes to
year.
the parking lot.
I know what
to
you're
Green
talking about.
Canyon.
Yeah.
Yeah,
This is just it's a residential road, but it's probably getting used more often by folks who are accessing the park from the rear.
well, and kids can get to school through there now too.
Mhm.
Is that, who addresses
So that's
speed bumps?
that might be an operational thing that we can work with the streets department on.
I would just say I live on Second East and we have as much traffic coming from Second East, and I don't know that.
I don't know, just people that live on there have
Speed-
asked me about it.
Speed bumps are. It ruins snow
Like
plows.
signs or what? Yeah,
And traffic calming.
okay. So who do people talk to about that?
Police officers to catch the speeders?
To the
Just
city,
reach out to us and we'd
Okay.
have to talk about, I
Yeah.
mean, these aren't planned improvements, but they're things that we would do.
but that
just
makes sense, signs or
reaction.
whatever, like deaf child or whatever.
So
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there are speed bumps, they should be removed. You do on 25th. So those don't damage cars?
No,
They don't damage cars?
not in the summer. Just kidding.
I don't know. That.
Yeah.
Are they by the school zone? I don't know. They've seen.
No,
those.
it's on the rural, it's
Oh.
on the
Rural
rural,
road
the
standard.
rural road.
Okay, that, great. I just said I would find out about that. So now I know to tell them to talk about that. Since we're talking about roads. Any other comments?
I have a comment on this last person about the lack of access and egress and ingress into that area. Can we move that ahead a little bit to get more of those people up there serviced?
Alan has tried everything possible.
And then in the future, there will be 2600 north of 23.
There are these two roadways right here. So we're actively trying to get these to go forward, but typically organically developers pay for them and those connections are made.
Yeah.
So the city's got to cobble together funding and resources to make them happen before development occurs.
Okay. Anything else? Anybody ready to make a motion to either approve or disapprove?
A recommendation.
A recommendation, a motion to make a recommendation. I gotta get my words right.
Madam Chairman, I would move we have a favorable recommendations for this
General plan
general
amendment.
plan for the roadways in North Logan.
All right, it's been moved by Heron in a second.
I second that.
Kenny seconds to pass on a favorable recommendation to the city council regarding the city initiative general plan amendment to update the North Logan City Roads Transportation Master Plan. All in favor?
Aye.
I opposed. All right, great. Got through that one. Let's move on to number 3.
Hopefully this one I think is maybe a little bit more lighthearted, so
Oh, yay.
hopefully it does a good conclusion to our meeting. Okay, so this is a forthcoming text amendment, so it's not in formal draft form, but it's more of just an initial work session, so we can get this out before you guys, let you guys know what's coming. We'll get some red lines to you in the next meeting. And we might hold a public hearing next meeting on this. I don't feel like this will be too controversial because it's an incentive more than anything. It opens up opportunities to our existing residents. But in this recent legislative session, Senate Bill 118 was adopted, which opened up what's called a state of Utah landscaping conversion incentive program. And basically what that means is the state has allocated funding for rebates to be given to individuals in the state to reduce their turf grass landscaping and put in water wise landscaping in place of where grass was before. And so this bill requires that a municipality pass an ordinance that restricts residential landscaping for future development, not existing, going forward. And upon passing that ordinance, we then become eligible as a community for our existing residents to participate in this incentive program and receive rebates for removing turf grass and replacing with water-wise landscaping. The crux of it is they're trying to reduce the amount of overhead watering. So sprinklers that throw water out on the grass and go to more of a drip irrigated, efficient landscape irrigation type of a setting. So this bill was passed and the city would like to adopt an ordinance to allow our residents to take advantage of the program. And it can be fairly simple as far as what would need to be in that ordinance. And we can just adopt the state minimum for now and then maybe work on some more landscaping in the future requirements. But the minimum requirements is it's split between residential and commercial. Okay. But some draft language that has been adopted. This is actually directly from Cedar City with, I did modify it just slightly in anticipation for a tweak that the legislature is doing. But what it basically indicates is that the following standards shall apply to new residential developments and residential construction. Okay, so A, the area within the public right of way between the curb and gutter and the sidewalk, otherwise known as the park strip, shall not be landscaped with lawn or turf. So park strips would need to be water-wise landscaped. B, lawn or turf areas shall not be less than 8 feet wide at its narrowest point. So if you've got a really skinny side yard, they're saying it's probably not going to be used for you to enjoy a picnic. Let's go ahead and maybe reduce the turf in those narrow, less usable areas. And then C, lawn or turf areas shall not exceed 50% of the total landscaped area for front and side yards. Lawn limitations do not apply for small residential lots with less than 250 square feet of landscaped area. So it's kind of like townhomes that have a little bit of landscaping out front. But what it's basically saying is your front yard and your side yards, whatever that area may be, no more than 50% of that should be grass. And that's, a lot of folks are already doing that. It's not that much more strict to say, bring that down to 50%, because if you have a flower bed, if you have a little bit of curbing with some flowers that is drip irrigated, that would count towards that reduction. Okay, so those are the minimums that we would have to adopt for future development. And then for non-residential development, so anything that's not residential, if they have common landscape areas, so these are like a multi-family project, if you have like an apartment project where they have common areas, what the requirement would be is that in those common areas, lawn or turf areas shall not exceed 20% of the total landscaped area outside of active recreation areas. So if they have let's say they have a little court in the middle of a couple of buildings and it's got a playground and some grassy area for people to throw a football or whatever, that actually doesn't count. They're saying that can be grass. Everything outside of those formally recognized recreation areas, no more than 20% should be lawn or turf. It's not really being used. It's not really programmed and people aren't using it for what you need grass to be used for. So that's number one. And then two is the area within the public right of way between the curb and gutter and the sidewalk, otherwise known as the park strip, shall not be landscaped with lawn or turf. The same as the residential requirement, but it's the same for commercial, institutional, multifamily, those types of uses. So the big thing is all park strips, no grass for whatever development. And then there's a little bit of differences between residential and non-residential. So if we were to draw this up in an ordinance, implement that into future development requirements, then our existing residents would be able to participate in the WaterWise landscape conversion program.
Okay,
that
which
make
is what
sense?
keeps being announced in the North Logan news. Let's keep saying, this is for commercial right now, and you can flip your strip
Just
eventually, and that's what this is.
kind of, it's not just flip the strip because you have eligible areas on your front and side yards. So
So you could flip.
the eligible areas, I believe, is 200 square feet. So you have to find a patch of 200 square feet to submit as a project to the state and be approved for that to be converted to WaterWise landscaping. But no, it's not just flip the strip. The city has a flip the strip program for commercial, but it's kind of a homegrown program that we have within our own ability to provide. This is a statewide program.
Gotcha.
Yep.
So this is a state program, but we would issue a city zoning text amendment adopting this text into.
To new.
So the
residents.
program, to be eligible as a community to participate in the program, the state said you have to adopt an ordinance with these restrictions for
okay.
new development first.
Okay.
That's their carrot basically to say, if you do this, then you can participate in the program.
The residents of the
existing,
municipality can, and so,
These requirements would only be for new development going forward.
and then they're incentivized by the state program that it will. How is the incentive actually working there?
The incentive is not for new home builders. The incentive is only for existing and converting landscape.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
So new homeowners would just have to comply with this requirement.
So but my understanding is if you flipped your from yard or something to meet those standards, you could get compensated.
They will
Yeah.
pay part of
Yeah.
that.
It's
So if you
basically
wanted to
the-
Go to this, then there's a compensation.
Yeah, it's
that
to
right?
reimburse you to try to help cover the costs of changing your landscaping, so you're not doing it completely out of pocket.
So
But
it's
you don't have to. You
It's
don't
an
have to change
indirect
it.
incentive for North Logan City because we're helping our residents, but there's no funding that actually gets into North Logan City's budgets through this, right?
I mean, it helps us because we don't use our own water
Yes,
resources as
good
heavily.
point. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
No.
Definitely helps us in that regard.
yeah.
But
Interesting.
what this would be, so as I'm looking at this language has to be baked into our code somewhere, and I think it needs to be in two places. It needs to be in our subdivision ordinance, so new subdivisions know that this is a requirement going forward. But it also needs to be in another standalone section for new development that some of these paper lots that have never been developed yet. And for some of these grandfathered parcels that technically have a development right that don't have to go through a subdivision process to gain a building permit, but would have to comply with this going forward. So in two different sections of code, and there might be some tweaks here and there. Some definitions that we'll have to add into our definition section, or at least call out the state definitions in the state code. So as we bring this back in red line form, it'll be a little bit more complicated than this, but this is the nuts and bolts of what has to be done in order for us to qualify for that program.
Okay,
Plan. for water
Interesting.
conservation.
good.
I probably need to get glasses, but will you zoom
Yeah,
that up just a little bit?
Questions? Do we
I like
talk
it.
about this? This is just a work session thing.
yeah, but it's open for questions.
Yeah.
We'll get into the actual drafting of it in the next week or so, so we can come back in July for your
Then our
guys'
questions,
review.
if we have- Karen, do you have a question?
Yeah, for existing homeowners like myself, what does that do to me? Do I have to go this way or is that?
No,
My
this
grandfather.
is an incentive. If you want
Okay.
to leave your landscaping be, you can. But if you want to reduce the amount of grass, because maybe you just don't want to mow it anymore, you just don't use it, and you'd rather save the water and, reduce your water bill. And have some help from the state to pay for your re-landscaping, then this is how it would help you. So the state will pay you to change your landscaping,
But not until we adopt this
correct?
text amendment. That's right. Keep watering
I
your
keep
lawn.
wanting to do my curb. I'm waiting for that. And North Logan,
I say it would not reduce my
my
water.
neighbor just did it. And I was like, oh.
Yeah. So commissioners, I don't view this as very controversial. I would like, if possible, to get a draft put together and hold a public hearing at our next meeting so that it can go to city council. Be nice to get this adopted before the end of the summer, because a lot of folks do landscaping in the fall, planting trees in the fall, the colder months. It'd be nice if they could take advantage of it before the end of the year and not have to wait until next year to be able to. Hyde Park City is actually one of the only cities currently that has this adopted. And it's probably because they just did their general plan and they've been adopting ordinances left and right, but
I think it makes sense.
yeah.
I guess a good incentive.
Okay.
So since you want to go quickly, I'll ask my question now.
Yeah.
So on B. So if I have a front yard like I do, I have, the grass I have is small, but it's somewhat decorative. It may not be 8 feet wide. So does that mean the space in which the yard in which the grass exists is greater than 8 feet, or like I can't? Because if I have like a triangle of grass, it's going to be smaller than 8 feet at some point.
Yeah, I think you are a very analytical thinker in this because you're not wrong. I think the state looked at this as maybe more of a broad stroke to say, look, if you've got a portion of land that is less than 8 feet, just don't put grass there.
Okay,
But what it's looking at is the front yard and the side yards. They're saying no more than 50% of that should be grass.
Right.
And they actually have, the
Yeah,
reason
so-
why I think that they didn't even think about this is because the image that they show on the waterwise, let me find it here. Oh, here it is, Utah Water Savers. Come on, internet. There's I'm gonna find this. There's an exhibit where they show an example home. And it has curbing, some of that ribbon curbing kind of meander
Yeah.
through their front yard. And there's a portion where it's pretty narrow, but you can tell that 50% is in planter beds and less than 50% is grass, but it's narrower than 8 feet. So I think the intent is if you've got a portion of land, mostly park strips, if it's, if it's 8 feet or less, don't
Mhm.
put grass there. If
Yeah,
it's not, if
we-
it's not usable space, don't put grass there.
Do we have to adopt the text amendment exactly as stated by the state? Or if we remove the bad wording like that example, do we still get all the benefits of the incentive?
I don't think the state is looking at this like they're looking at the moderate income housing. Because the language I just showed you is directly from Cedar City codified ordinance that was approved and they're eligible for the program. So, and the reason why I took that language is because they literally adopted the bare minimum to become eligible, and there's not much more to it than that.
Okay.
So I think that they won't be a scrutiny or a scrutinous in
Well,
this.
I am an engineer and a nerd, and yes. But
I hear you, brother.
it'll get me out of trouble. It'll get us all out
Yeah.
of trouble. if We think through some of this sometimes.
No, you're
I may
right.
go overboard, and I get it.
I'll be the devil's advocate. Don't let progress be no, don't let
But-
perfection be what's the term?
Yeah, exactly. I don't, yeah, so
Perfect is the
I'm gonna shut up at some point, but I think, so what you're saying, I'm gonna keep talking until you do, no. Uh, So it's not the lawn, it's not the lawn, it's the.
The landscape
the
area.
Landscape area.
I think that's the
Yeah,
intent,
okay.
yeah.
That's a good word, landscape area.
It doesn't say we have, if there's
There.
better language we want to adopt, then by all means, why not do that? So if you want to brainstorm how to fix that issue, I'm all ears.
Well, no, because we came from Colorado before we came here, and water was just as precious as it is here. So our front yard was built with that in mind. And I have grass that's less than 8 feet wide, so I just want to make
But
sure.
you're less than 50% turf on your
Oh,
front
wait, yeah,
side, right?
goodness, yeah.
I think that's the intent the state's trying to incentivize.
Maybe you, Gavin, that's it.
Well, I've already done it. I should have. But anyway, yeah.
You missed
Hey,
that.
Scott, if I put all of my irrigation underground, would that qualify?
So they want you to go to drip irrigation. They want you to get away from sprinklers that spray water. So they want you to they want you to choose plants that are drought tolerant, but they're not looking at is this the perfect plant for drought tolerance in your microclimate? I mean, they would love for you to find the exact species that is able to thrive on like no water in your yard, but the intent is that we get away from turf grasses because they eat up a lot of water. And when we spray water out of sprinklers, half of it gets evaporated anyways, and then it doesn't go back into our aquifers. There's a lot of reasons why instead of just focusing on grass, because it's a low hanging fruit where we can make a lot of progress on water saving.
I will say, just as a
Sure is.
point of reference, I put drip system throughout my yard and it does not work well with the secondary water system
Hmm.
in here in North Logan.
You got to get
It's-
some filters on it first.
I have
right?
filters on. They
Yeah.
clog up in a day and then it just clogs all my drippers up. So
Because of the irrigation. All right,
it's just
okay.
That's a note to,
over here.
No.
No, maybe there's a solution to that. That we
Yeah.
can brainstorm.
we're gonna have TikTok residents if they've been.
Okay, are we finished? Can we be done talking about this?
Yes, we can be done.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right,
You just have to
We like
clean
it.
Constantly.
we like this, Scott. Let's get it
Okay,
out there.
Cool.
Okay, staff business discussion.
none.
I have a question.
Yep.
All these people come, like Kenny gets emails. I get people come to my house.
Mhm.
I'm not gonna answer my door anymore. I'm like, can I grab you tonight? Yes, I am. Anyway. I have neighbors that
I'm not grabbed.
walk through the park, Elkridge Park, every morning and pick up all the garbage.
Oh, that's nice.
And they say there's no garbage cans to dump it in, so they take it home and dump it in their garbage can. Why are there not garbage cans at Elkridge Park? Okay,
It's an experiment right now. When you remove the garbage cans, the amount of garbage either remains the same or reduced. And so what we're seeing right now is, yes, the garbage out of the farm, but that's also because we used to have approved. To a person with a disability who was found, they work in the parks, and they would go to the entire park, walk everything, every park, including those. And so there's kind of variables that we're trying to figure out right now, meaning, would there be the same amount of garbage if that same crew is here right now? But we have noticed there's significant reduction around
Well, the reason why is because those people come every morning.
The theory is that if there's no garbage cans, then folks have to pack it out with them.
And they don't, because I walk around the park every morning and I see these people with their bags full of garbage, and that's why there's no garbage.
I'll say yes. But I will also say after dumping the garbage can, dump fridge and none of you and everywhere else. That was 3 or 4 bags and that was every single reservation. And now we don't have any. of that.
Well, that's good.
So it is an experiment, we are watching it.
So should I tell them to quit picking up the garbage?
Yeah, you're ruining their experiment.
I mean, it's very nice public service that they do. Well, I'm sure, yeah, because we're all slobs. Yeah. Yeah. And put it in your garbage can. Anyway, I said that I would find out about that.
But an example, it's going hard. But people had a part that experimented with this, and the one thing I always noticed when I was there is they had no garbage. If people got used to it, they would all pick it up, they pack it out, put it in the dump.
But there's no dumpsters on the way out of Elkridge Park.
They're screwed up.
Can they dump it in the one up by the Lions Lodge thingy?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, because they didn't know that it was a public dumpster for garbage. So. Right, just
Or bikes or whatever.
just
team.
garbage from the park. I'll tell them that. What would never
People do
fly?
it though.
Anyway,
Say, I
Sorry.
gotta say, there's the one over there by,
I just tell people I'll find out. Don't come to my house anymore. Call Kenny, email Kenny.
That's right.
Emails?
Let me give you
Okay,
My work email.
planning commission business done.
Yes.
Our next meeting, no
Wait.
more, Scott?
You
I
have-
just want to make sure everybody knows, so we are going to go ahead and cancel the first and third meetings in July in favor of a meeting in the middle of the month on the 13th.
Yeah.
So mark your calendars.
Let me double check.
I believe we'll still have a quorum. I know one had mentioned they weren't able to make that, but others had mentioned it worked better for their holiday schedules. So
I'm the one that will probably, I'm gonna be helping at a young men's camp and I thought I'd be able to leave and come here for that, but I might be required to stay there. So.
but you want to come home for a shower.
I know, that's right, I know.
Week
You
shower.
were obligated to be here.
Okay,
Thank you.
That's Steph business.
I
think that's it.
that's it.
Really?
Thank you, Scott.
Yep.
Thank you, everyone. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn this meeting.
It's been moved and seconded. We adjourn. All in favor?
I.